The old farmhouse stood alone at the end of a narrow dirt road, surrounded by frozen fields and leaning fences that looked ready to collapse under another hard winter. Most people in eastern Oklahoma avoided the property completely. Locals called it cursed after the owners disappeared nearly 5 years earlier. No one wanted the land. No one wanted the memories attached to it. That was exactly why Elijah Boone bought it. The former Navy SEAL sat quietly behind the wheel of his faded pickup truck as snow drifted across the windshield in soft waves. Beside him, an aging German shepherd lifted his head slowly, ears twitching toward the distant farmhouse. "Easy, Scout," Elijah said softly. The dog gave a low breath and rested his muzzle back against the seat. For nearly 12 years, Scout had worked beside Elijah through deserts, ruined cities, and missions neither of them could ever explain to ordinary people. The dog was older now, slower. Gray fur spread around his eyes and muzzle like winter frost. But Scout still watched the world carefully as if danger could appear at any second. In truth, Elijah watched the world the same way. 21 years in the military had trained him to notice everything. Loose doors, fresh tire tracks, silence that felt wrong, and this place felt wrong immediately. The farmhouse should have been empty. That was what the auction papers said. Abandoned, condemned unclaimed. But as Elijah stared toward the property through the falling snow, he noticed something small drifting from the chimney. Smoke, very thin, very real. Scout noticed it too. The old shepherd slowly sat upright. Elijah's fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Someone was inside. The wind carried the smell of burning firewood through the cold afternoon air as Elijah stepped from the truck. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The farm looked worse up close. Sections of the barn roof had collapsed inward. Rusted farming equipment sat buried beneath weeds and ice. The porch sagged heavily on one side. But someone had cleared a narrow path through the snow leading to the front door. Fresh footprints. Not old, not abandoned. Scout moved beside him carefully, shoulders stiff with age but alert. Elijah rested one hand near the flashlight on his belt out of old habit. Then the front door creaked open slowly. An elderly woman stood there frozen in place. Her gray sweater hung loosely over thin shoulders, and fear filled her tired eyes the moment she saw him. Behind her, an older man stepped forward quickly, holding a fireplace poker in trembling hands. "Please," the woman whispered immediately. "Please don't call the sheriff." Elijah stopped halfway up the porch. For several seconds, nobody moved. The snow drifted quietly around them, while Scout stared at the couple without aggression. The old man lowered the poker slightly. "We're leaving soon," he said quickly. "We just needed somewhere warm for a little while." Elijah studied them carefully. Neither looked dangerous, only exhausted. The woman's hands shook badly from the cold. The man's boots were held together with duct tape. A weak fire flickered behind them inside the dark farmhouse. "How long have you been here?" Elijah finally asked. The couple exchanged nervous glances. "Almost 3 months," the woman admitted quietly. 3 months. Elijah looked past them into the house. Blankets hung across broken windows to keep heat inside. Canned food lined the counters neatly. Whoever these people were, they had tried to survive with dignity. "What are your names?" he asked. "Walter," the old man answered, "and I'm June." Elijah nodded once. "Well," he said calmly, "I guess we should get out of the cold first." The couple looked stunned, as if kindness itself had become unfamiliar. Inside, the farmhouse smelled of wood smoke, dust, and old memories. Elijah removed his gloves slowly while Scout circled the room carefully before settling near the fireplace. June immediately knelt beside the dog. "Oh my goodness," she whispered softly. "Look at that sweet face." Scout leaned gently into her touch. That alone told Elijah plenty. Dogs knew people better than most humans ever did. Walter kept watching Elijah cautiously. "About this place?" he asked. "Closed on it yesterday." Walter looked embarrassed. "We didn't know. Nobody's been here in years." Elijah nodded. "Why stay here?" Silence settled heavily across the room. June lowered her eyes toward the fire. Finally, Walter spoke. "Our son stole our house." The words landed quietly, but hard. Elijah said nothing. Walter sat down slowly in an old wooden chair. "He convinced us to put everything in his name after June got sick last year. Said it would help with medical debt." His jaw tightened painfully. 3 months later, he sold the property and disappeared. June wiped her eyes quickly. We tried shelters, she whispered. Most were full, some weren't safe. She looked around the farmhouse quietly. This place was empty, or we thought it was. Elijah leaned back silently. He had seen war destroy families overseas. But sometimes betrayal at home looked even crueler. The fire crackled softly between them. Finally, Elijah spoke. You can stay. Walter blinked in disbelief. What? You heard me. The old man shook his head immediately. No, son, this is your property. Elijah looked around the broken farmhouse. Not much of one yet. June gave a faint smile for the first time. That evening, snow continued falling outside while Elijah unpacked supplies from his truck. Coffee, bread, soup cans, dog food, basic things, simple things. But June nearly cried when he handed her fresh groceries. Nobody should react to soup like that, Elijah thought quietly, which meant life had probably been far harder than they admitted. Later that night, Elijah sat alone on the porch, wrapped in an old military jacket, while Scout rested beside him. The farm stretched silently beneath moonlight. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt shared. Inside the house, he could hear June humming softly while washing dishes. A home, not a mission, not a deployment. Just people trying to survive winter together. Scout lifted his head suddenly. Elijah followed the dog's gaze toward the road. Headlights. A black SUV crawled slowly past the property before disappearing into darkness. Elijah's instincts sharpened instantly. Something about the vehicle felt wrong. The next morning arrived gray and bitterly cold. Elijah woke before sunrise, old habits refusing to die. He found Walter outside already attempting to repair part of the chicken coop despite the freezing wind. You should be inside, Elijah said. Walter smiled faintly. Hard to feel useful sitting still. Elijah understood that feeling better than most people. Together, they worked quietly for hours, hammering boards, clearing brush, repairing fences, and slowly the farm began looking alive again. June cooked lunch on an old gas stove while Scout slept near the fireplace. For a little while, the place almost felt peaceful, until the black SUV returned. This time it stopped directly outside the farmhouse. 3 men stepped out. Elijah noticed immediately how they moved. Not military, but confident. The kind of confidence that came from intimidating weaker people. Walter's face lost all color the moment he saw them. Oh no, he whispered. One of the men walked onto the porch without invitation. Tall, heavy jacket, mean eyes. Well, he said coldly, look who's still here. June gripped the kitchen counter tightly. Elijah stepped forward calmly. Can I help you? The man looked him over dismissively. This doesn't concern you. Elijah's expression never changed. It's my property. So yeah, it does. The man smirked slightly. Walter finally spoke. He works for Raymond Tate. June trembled beside the stove. Elijah looked back at the stranger. And who's Raymond Tate? The man laughed once. He owns most of this county. That explained the attitude. The stranger stepped closer. Old Walter owes money. Big money. Mr. Tate's been patient. Walter looked ashamed. June quietly began crying. Elijah pieced things together quickly. Medical bills, desperation, predatory loans, the kind of trap thousands of elderly people fell into every year. How much? Elijah asked. Walter shook his head. Too much. The stranger smiled coldly. 42,000. Elijah studied him silently, then he noticed something else. The man kept glancing toward the barn. Interesting. Very interesting. After several tense moments, the men finally left with a warning. 3 days, the leader said, before climbing into the SUV. Then we take collateral. When they disappeared down the road, silence returned heavily. Walter sat down slowly at the kitchen table. I'm sorry, he whispered. You shouldn't have gotten involved. Elijah stared toward the barn thoughtfully. What's in there? Walter froze. June looked frightened again. Finally, Walter answered quietly. Something Raymond wants. That night, Elijah investigated the barn alone. Snow drifted through holes in the roof while Scout limped beside him carefully. At first, the building looked empty except for broken equipment and rotting hay. Then Elijah noticed fresh chains near the back wall. He moved several old wooden crates aside. Underneath them sat a heavy steel hatch built into the floor, hidden deliberately. Elijah exchanged a glance with Scout before pulling it open. A narrow staircase disappeared underground. The air below smelled cold and damp. Elijah switched on his flashlight. What he found beneath the barn made him stop completely. Rows of old wooden shelves lined the underground room, glass jars, documents, metal lockboxes, and along one wall stood dozens of Native American artifacts carefully preserved beneath canvas covers. Arrowheads, ceremonial tools, ancient pottery. Elijah stared in disbelief. Walter had hidden an entire historical collection beneath the farm. Back inside the house, Walter finally told the truth. The artifacts had belonged to his grandfather, who spent 50 years protecting items discovered across tribal land generations earlier. Historians had once offered enormous money for the collection, but Walter never sold it. It wasn't ours to profit from, he said quietly. Then Raymond Tate learned about it, and everything changed. He wanted the collection, June whispered. When Walter refused, the pressure started. Loans, threats, manipulation. Eventually, their own son became involved trying to escape debt himself. Greed had destroyed the entire family. Elijah sat quietly absorbing everything. Then he looked toward Scout, lying beside the fire. For years, he had spent his life protecting strangers overseas. Maybe this broken farm was simply another mission, just a different kind. The following morning, Elijah drove into town. The little Oklahoma community looked frozen in time. Old brick storefronts, rusted signs, small diners filled with farmers escaping the cold. Inside the county records office, Elijah learned something interesting very quickly. Raymond Tate already had multiple fraud complaints filed against him. Most disappeared mysteriously. Small towns protected powerful men sometimes. But Elijah also found something else. The underground collection had legal tribal protection status filed decades earlier, meaning Tate could never legally own it, which explained why intimidation mattered so much. That evening, Elijah contacted an old friend from his military years. Sarah Mitchell now worked as an investigative attorney specializing in property fraud. After hearing the story, she agreed to come immediately. 2 days later, tension exploded. Just after sunset, Tate's men returned, this time with trucks and weapons. June panicked instantly while Walter stood pale beside the window, but Elijah remained calm, very calm. Scout stood beside him, growling low in his throat. Then another set of headlights appeared behind Tate's vehicles, county police, and behind them came Sarah's SUV. The expressions on Tate's men changed immediately. Sarah stepped out holding folders, thick with documents. "You boys picked the wrong property," she said coldly. What followed moved quickly. Search warrants, fraud investigations, illegal loan evidence, threat reports from other elderly residents. Years of corruption began unraveling all at once, and Raymond Tate finally realized someone had fought back. By midnight, the trucks were gone. So were Tate's men. Snow drifted quietly across the yard once again. Inside the farmhouse, June cried openly while Walter sat speechless at the kitchen table. Elijah poured coffee silently. "You saved us," June whispered. Elijah shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "You survived long enough to be saved." For several weeks afterward, life settled into something gentle. The investigation against Tate spread across the county. Other families came forward. Reporters arrived. Lawyers got involved. Meanwhile, the farmhouse slowly transformed. Walter repaired fences with Elijah each morning. June planted winter herbs inside old wooden boxes near the kitchen windows. Scout followed everyone from room to room like an aging guardian, making sure the family stayed together. And somehow, without anyone saying it aloud, the lonely old farmhouse stopped feeling abandoned. One evening near Christmas, snow fell softly while lights glowed warmly inside the home. June placed dinner on the table carefully. Walter laughed quietly at something Scout had done, and Elijah paused in the doorway watching them. For years after leaving the military, he believed his life had already ended somehow. Not physically, but emotionally. War changed people. Loss changed people. Loneliness hollowed people out slowly. But standing there in that warm farmhouse, hearing quiet laughter drift through the rooms, Elijah realized something important. Broken lives were not always ruined lives. Sometimes they were simply waiting for someone patient enough to help rebuild them. Later that night, Elijah stepped outside alone. Snow covered the fields in silver moonlight. Scout limped out beside him and sat quietly at his feet. The old shepherd looked up at him with tired, faithful eyes. Elijah smiled faintly and scratched behind the dog's ears. You did good, partner. The farmhouse glowed warmly behind them now, not abandoned anymore, not forgotten. A place that once held fear and betrayal had somehow become a home again. And out across the quiet Oklahoma fields, where winter winds whispered softly through broken fences now slowly being repaired, something else had returned, too. Hope, the kind that arrived quietly. One small act of kindness at a time, and maybe that was enough to save people after all.